Okay, we are live. Zach, you can start.
All right, perfect. So welcome everyone to SMR's Open Seminar Series. This is the seventh lecture for this autumn series. Today we have the excellent Keti Chukhrov, who will be speaking on Deleuze without Guattari. I will introduce her momentarily. Firstly, I would just like to say a few words about the school to introduce everyone who is unaware what it's all about. So the School of Materialist Research is an education and research collective that offers intensive study courses, seminars, special programs, and research initiatives that address the materialisms running through contemporary science, philosophy, art, mathematics, design, architecture, and politics. SMR was founded by the Center for Philosophical Technologies at Arizona State University, the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities Skopje, the Department for Architecture Theory and Philosophy of Technics at TU Vienna, and their Critical Inquiry Lab at the Design Academy Eindhoven, and serves as a global hub for education, research, and experimentation at the intersection of the humanities, social sciences, creative fields, and the STEM sciences. So now I'll just say a quick few words about Keti before handing it over to her. So Keti Chukhrov is an associate professor at the School of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at the Higher School of Economics, Moscow. In 2017 to 19, she was Marie Sklodowska Curie Fellow in the UK Wolverhampton University. She has authored numerous texts on art theory and philosophy. Her articles include The Philosophical Disability of Reason, Evald my apologies. Ilyenkov's Critique of Machinic Intelligence in Radical Philosophy, Epistemological Gaps Between the Socialist East and the Democratic West in Primary Documents, and Art and Theory of Post-1989 Central and Eastern Europe, a critical anthology which was in Duke University Press. Her latest book, Practicing the Good, Desire and Boredom in Soviet Socialism with the University of Minnesota, deals with the impact of socialist political economy on the epistemes of historical socialism. Her full-length books to date include To Be, to Perform, Theater and Philosophical Critique of Art, and Pound, a volume of dramatic writing, Merely Humans, and her research interests and publications deal with philosophy of performivity, Soviet Marxist philosophy and communist epistemology, and art as the Institute of Global Contemporaneity. So Keti, if everything's okay from your end, we can begin.
Well, thanks. Thanks for introduction, Zachary, and many thanks to Katerina for invitation to the School of Materialist Research. Well, my talk is called Deleuze without Guattari, and I have been dealing with this issue for quite a time, although it is only now that I had to somehow catch up with this research, which I started a few years ago when I explored performativity and the bond of Deleuzean epistemes and concepts with the topology of performance. And what was surprising indeed for me that numerous interpretations of Deleuze, they take up mainly the direction and the path and the route of Deleuze that somehow associates him with Guattari's semiology and certain kind of research in molecular revolution in the studies of capitalism. So the books written together in duo with Felix Guattari. Meanwhile, the topology that he develops in other pieces, such as Logic of Sense, difference and repetition, or the fault, are somehow not taken into account. So when I tried to somehow describe or deal with the notions and their descriptions deployed in these works, there is always contradiction, that it is not Deleuze, and that this brings us to the idea that maybe there are two Deleuses, or there are two different Deleuses. So what happens? Why these interpretations are not compatible? So I start with Guattari. The role of Guattari is crucial, of course, and important in revolutionizing semiology, in critique of the signifier and the project of asignification. And of course, Deleuze is part and parcel of that project, which creates the regimes of abstract machine. And abstract machine is one such asignifying register that has to dissociate various forms of axiomatics. And there are three or maybe even four most important traits to this undertaking, which changes how ontology and ontics is treated and approached. First of all, in this semiology, the main thing is irreversibility. Second, irreducibility. Third, immanence. And of course, molecular variation. So confining objecthood and generally phenomena to their molecular hybridities. Now, these molecular hybridities are often criticized by Hegelians, psychoanalysis, or even political thinkers, blaming them in the minor goals, or in the confining of struggle to atomized particles. But I would say that this atomization or hybridization for Guattari was not so much about the minor goals, but rather the capacity to encompass, to grasp the internal and the external. Because if you molecularize everything, then you can somehow encompass and claim the transformation of all realms and areas. So molecular dimension and the dimension of the hybridity was indispensable to launch the mutation, and mutation could guarantee that certain zones that are already mutated or hybridized, they cannot be appropriated, because these mutations are contingent, or they anarchic, or they are somehow contaminating the established roots of signification. Meanwhile, I have to make a remark that for me, Guattari is different from nominalism, which comes later in actor network theory in Latour, and in post-actor network theory like Barad, because I think that he's free from their dogmatics, although he shares with them certain conditions such as inseparability, continuity, and, as I mentioned, irreducibility and irreversibility. Now, of course, we know that Deleuze, together with Guattari, works with the strata of the molecular, of the virtual, of the machinic. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, for me, Deleuze also has the zones which are difficult to correlate with the research and pieces done and written in collaboration with Guattari. And these are the zones which we never come across, or very rarely come across, in those books written together, such as event, repetition, irreversibility, so as against reversibility. Oh, sorry. I was talking constantly about irreversibility in Guattari. Sorry. On the contrary, Guattari together with Deleuze deal with reversibility. And Deleuze, in this other books that he writes himself, deals with event, death, irreversibility, double causality, and his theory of three repetitions, temporality of Aeon, some kind of pure temporality that he discusses, for instance, in difference and repetition. It is interesting in this connection to look at two opposite views on Deleuze, that of Badiou and that of Peter Hallward. You know very well the books of the book of Badiou, Clamour of Being, and maybe I would now. Shift to the screen. So according to Badiou's book, Clamour of Being, despite the emphasis on subversion, Deleuze did not change anything since Heidegger's treatment of ontology. For Badiou, despite Deleuze's Spinozism and molecular multiplicity and dealing with it, Deleuze is a thinker of the one, of univocality. And his Bergsonism is simply pantheistic, simply pantheist nature philosophy. Hallward, conversely, in his book Out of This World, where he tries to deal with the creativity as understood by Deleuze, emphasizes completely opposite quality of Deleuze. So these two extremes show us this incompatibility in Deleuze himself. And for Hallward, the main thing is virtuality. So while for Badiou, Deleuze deals with physicalism and immanence, Hallward sees Deleuze as cosmologist, almost a theologist that tears from and beyond reality. Now, my question is, if Deleuze is the thinker of immanence only and of immanence solely, what should be done with those quasi-metaphysical notions exceeding philosophy of immanence that he presents in the books that I listed? Difference and Repetition, Logique du Sens, and The Fold, such as double causality, event, plane of the ideal, incorporeality, the tragic, and the list can be continued. Now, Badiou solves this problem in the following way. He claims that all those quasi-metaphysical notions in Deleuze, for instance, event, remain within being. They are immanent to it. This is so because for Badiou himself, event should reveal itself beyond the empirical plane. And he claims that Deleuze's event remains in this horizontality and immanence of empiricism and cannot traverse or transcend this plane. Now, Negri agrees with this view of Badiou about Deleuze, and about event generally, but with the difference that if the concept of event is crucial and important for Badiou, for Negri, the concept of event is rather a metaphor for metaphysics and should be rejected. Event for Negri is some sort of a posteriori to immanence, as event has to exceed immanence. And in this case, event becomes an exclusion from the immanence or establishment of power. So for Negri, then transformation and eventual transformation that Deleuze talks about, and generally the transformation, even within political realm, should remain within its immanence, and only such transformation is valuable. Whereas Badiou, as we remember, insists that transformation has to surpass immanence to ascend to another possibility and side, the eventual side, where the event would evolve. Thus, for Negri, Deleuze's event simply means a subversive move within immanence, the tool to discern the contingency within immanence. And such topology is the following. When event surpasses immanence, it implies metaphysics, and such metaphysical view on event brings to self-sufficient narcissism, because when we claim that there is eventuality of something that surpasses immanence, it introduces and establishes superiority over the process of political engagement. And therefore, event in this case is criticized by Negri because it is a leap. It is some supreme condition in comparison to empiricism, to ontology. And then we get into the trap of idealism. This is the view of Negri. Now, Peter Hallward's move is converse. If Badiou's Deleuze is submerged in the organic matter and its procedures teeming with particles and elements, Hallward claims, on the contrary, that Deleuze should be studied through virtuality, even divinity, through outwardliness, through counter-actuality. Deleuze's Bergsonism, therefore, for Hallward implies the almost quasi-theological concept of the world, which regards direct actualization as a vulgar form of actualization. So if Badiou squeezes Deleuze into the empirical bottom, Hallward emphasizes Deleuze's idea of supreme being and sees Deleuze at the sublime empty heights. And this height for Hallward is virtual. In both cases, Deleuze is the thinker of unity, of univocal mode of ontology. To repeat, for Hallward, the pure moment of actualization is not important, either for Bergson or for Deleuze. More important is the virtual time of potentiality and what Bergson calls pure eternal past. This is because in this zone, all actions are taking place as if in a dream. And here we have eternal pure time, which does not need any direct present, any hic and nunc. So focusing on Deleuze's quasi-metaphysical concepts, event, the plane of the ideal, counter-effectuation, repetition, these concepts which are somehow delineated or somehow separated from the Guattarian concepts, for Hallward, these concepts simply mean absolute beyondness from the world, absolute virtuality, absolute externality, as they remain in the pure beyond, as if there is only supreme being. Thus, for Badiou, when he treats Deleuze, there is only immanent being, and for Hallward, only external realm beyond being. Now, just a couple of quotations from Hallward himself. Each distinct act or event of creation is adequate to the whole of creative time in its entirety and eternity. In their indivisible virtuality, they all form one and the same single event. So we see here that time itself is creating, as with Bergson, but this is the cosmic time out of the world. In this time of creating, which is indivisible, every moment is eternal, constituting ideal event of this beyond, of this virtual eternity. And further on, another quotation, as it crystallizes in the now, every passing moment tips momentarily into the actuality of the present and the apparent solidity of extension. But by the same token, every present moment passes continuously from this ephemeral now into the virtual continuity of the past. And again, a very Bergsonian interpretation. So even the radical present moment gets past anyway. Consequently, creativity is virtual as everything gets past. As any actuality is always immediately in the past, then any actuality occurs to be virtual. Consequently, whatever is done in actuality, theater, theatrical gesture, artistic gesture, performative gesture, is not actualization, but it's counter-actualization. So counter-actualization means suspension of this vulgar actualization for Hallward in his interpretation of Deleuze. Thus, creation should be perceived through counter-actualization, and he thinks that this is the main thing in Deleuze, the shift towards this emptiness out of the world, beyond the world, where things are simply virtual non-actualities. Because if we actualize something, it will simply be a profane product to be thrown away, to dispense with. And we have this logic also in Antonin Artaud, when he says that he doesn't want to produce a concrete artwork because it will be simply an excrement. That's why he simply wants to remain in this beyond of the completeness of production. Thus, something that is created in the effectuated, actualized sense is devoid of the indivisibility and continuity of the creative processuality. Creativity should preserve the virtual potentiality and process. It is virtuality that could preserve the condition when creating is never finished. So not to finish creativity, you should remain constantly virtual or in virtuality. And we see to what extent Hallward's interpretation makes him a Spinozist theologist, adherent to cosmic creativity as certain substance, which equals divine material virtuality. Now, why it is so easy to bring Deleuze to this virtual interpretation or virtualist interpretation of the event, and generally to confine everything to counter-actualization as anti-actualization. Because Deleuze, by the way, has this very explicit example of the event, of how event is taking place when he talks about the soldier and the battle. When he says that to understand the event of the battle, you cannot be in the body of the soldier who is shaking the sword, but this event can be only perceived when the soldier had already been wounded, or when he is between life and death on the battlefield, looking at it as if from outside, as at something unreal. And only in this case, one can attain the dimension of the event. It is in this sense that Hallward talks about counter-actualization, when event is nothing but simply virtuality, virtual suspension of actuality. Now, My point is that Deleuze is neither the univocal ontologist, as with Badiou, nor the univocal virtualist in whose beyond of the world actualization is suspended, as is the claim of Hallward. He's neither the thinker of pure actuality, nor is he the thinker of pure virtuality beyond the world, in which even the event is counter-actualization. As I see, Deleuze accomplishes the eventual connection of two dimensions of the world. And we see this explicitly in his book on Leibniz, The Fold, the Pli, Le Pli, where he brings forth the topology of deux étages, the two stories, the non-binary duality as the tool of epistemology. Therefore, I would suggest to look upon Deleuze's topology neither as the empiricist bottom of teeming particles of the mundane present, nor as the pure theological or supra-theological cosmology beyond being. I would suggest to keep in mind both domains, as I think Deleuze's achievement is in connecting these two realms. What enables me to allege this? It is the notion of genesis. I already mentioned the deux étages in Deleuze's The Fold, but in logic of sense and indifference and repetition, he also has these two phenomena. Because when he talks about event, he talks about two modalities of event. And many overlook this application of two modes of event. Event with capital E and the smaller case e. Meanwhile, event which takes place in the pure time of effectuation in Aeon, in pure temporality, event with capital E, so something that happens in this extreme reality, is genetically tied to the plane event with the smaller case e taking place in the bottom, in this realm of teeming particles and molecules, etc. So Deleuze talks of both worlds of teeming quantities and the world of abstract diagrammatic trajectories and abstract lines. These realms are disjunct but conjoined at the same time. One supreme realm releases itself out of another as the butterfly releases itself from the caterpillar cocoon. This metaphor about the butterfly which flies out of the caterpillar cocoon comes from the Deux Étages when he describes the second floor of the Baroque architecture, which is not simply the added double constructed upon the first, but it's certain kind of subversive grow out of it. In this case, abstraction doesn't mean something completely virtual, but it is distilling from the mess of the bottom into intensified condition. It is the intensification of the immanence of the lower étage, of the lower event, lower realm, which grows out of the bottom, is transformed, but preserves its genesis in the mess, in the dirt of the immanence, being conjoined to it. And this is precisely the novelty and the discovery and innovation of Deleuze when he brings this term together in difference and repetition, transcendental empiricism, something that is very difficult to understand, but maybe we try to. Now, just to go back to the topology and semiology that is characteristic for the books written not only by Deleuze and Guattari together, but by numerous representatives of French post-structuralism, such as Lyotard, in his seminal work, The Tooth, the Palm, or Pierre Boulez. Pierre Boulez is a composer, but his work is absolutely important because it was him who developed serialism and the logic of series. And here, Guattari's semiological inventions are crucial to the extent that they can as well be traced in many other works which I listed. And what is really crucial in this semiology, one of the crucial tricks which we come across everywhere, it's the violation or the overturn of the sequence of cause and effect. And you have it everywhere, in Pierre Boulez, in Lyotard's The Tooth, the Palm, in Deleuze's Logique du Sens, and of course in his collaborative works with Guattari and in Guattari's asignifying semiology. So what was crucial here? There was this idea that libidinal economy can be undermined if you simply break this connection between cause and effect. And Lyotard calls this connection libidinal connection. For instance, even Deleuze uses constantly this overturned cause and effects. The scar before you wound yourself, crying before you hurt your finger, being sentenced to punishment before committing the crime. This overturn of the cause and effect was the obsession of the whole generation, as I said, and it was crucial and important in art, music, thought. And of course, such notions as incorporeality, pure event, or for instance, Deleuze uses this metaphor, the smile of the Cheshire cat without the cat. It definitely corresponds to this logic. And what was crucial was that, as Lyotard emphasizes, it is awful when in every poetics, then in every work of art, you first experience the pain of your tooth, and then the reflex is everywhere to depict this bond of reflex and pain and reflex reaction, is that you squeeze the aching cheek with your hand. And he says that if we break this logic and this reflex, then the signs and the signification will scatter around aleatorically, and the cause and effect connections will be delinked in some kind of supreme semiology in which we shall not recognize those causes or effects. In this case, pain could come before the hit. This construct became some sort of aesthetic cliché as well, not only for Lyotard, but as well for Deleuze and Guattari, and generally in the poetics of seriality. Such total dissociation was crucial when all signs or alter signs are contingent, aleatoric, torn from the subject of creation or the source of origin, and they lose genesis, something that I said was important when I tried to connect these two realms. Now, Deleuze has this context where he works completely undermining and breaking the bonds of genesis. Deleuze adheres to such twist when he talks of the smile of the Cheshire cat without the cat, or those quasi-causes that he considers in the zone of the ideal event. And it is very important, again, to align this poetics to reversibility, which I mentioned in the beginning, initially in connection with Guattari. Of course, when we break this connection between cause and effect, the libidinal connection of the cause and effect, we allow the signs to be reversible and delinked. No doubt, Deleuze in tandem with Guattari accepts such poetics of reversibility. Yet, despite all the figures listed above, Deleuze doesn't adhere completely to sterile and pure semiotics, surfaces for the sake of surfaces, as it is stated by Hallward. So, nor does he immerse in the empirical mess of a bottom, stated by Badiou. So neither the pure semiology nor the empirical bottom and immersion into empirical depth as in Badiou. Rather, everything that reveals itself on the surface, and this is important, undergoes becoming under the influence of procedures grounded in genesis from below. Paradoxic element that runs across the series, or transversality, goes across these both realms, the realm of elemental teaming and the realm where the event with uppercase E distills itself from the occasional event with smaller case e. This paradoxical emergence from the mass of organisms and bodies takes place due to exit from the event with smaller case e to the event with the uppercase E, I'm repeating, onto the surface of abstract performing. And this abstraction then is not delinked or detached completely from the previous heavy areas of messy empirical reality, but it's genetically tied to it, as if with umbilical cord. In such topology, we get something else than simply cosmic relativity of Guattari's semiology. So that the surface, the virtual world, and pure event are not so much the alternative to the contents, to the depth of the contents, but are the event in relation to the event, another event which takes place in the thickness of bodies. Then the abstract line, semiological abstraction of nonsensical paradox, the smile without the cat, occur to be the act of falling out, the act of Creole, leap on one and the same place, falling out of this depth onto the surface. This is how I understand the statement of Deleuze, according to which the event is not merely the actual reality, but it is counter-actualization. In this case, counter-actualization will rather be a hyper-actualization, not insufficient actualization or suspended actualization, as with Hallward's interpretation, but rather extreme actualization rather than the seizure of it in the virtual beyond in Hallward's interpretation. Then the incorporeality mentioned by Deleuze, because Deleuze constantly talks about both bodies, particles, molecules, but he as well talks about incorporeality and abstraction. So the incorporeality mentioned by Deleuze in case of such falling out is not about the loss of body, but it is a new performative plane at which, due to this transformation, a corporeal vulnerability is performatively surpassed. So that then the regular corporeal daily existence reaches the performative ideality. This performative extreme is possible due to the fact that it is an artistic or performative repetition of the regular reality. But when we say performative repetition, it's not simply repetition or reproduction or imitation or mimicking. Repeating something performatively can be absolutely paradoxically not reminiscent or not similar to what you repeat. I would bring Deleuze's quote from Logic of Sense. How to do so that one process did not continue in another one naturally, so that the silent trace of the incorporeal crack on the surface does not immerse into the depth of the clamour of the body, so that the superficiality of the wound did not become deep. Is it possible to preserve the incorporeal crack that hampers its actualization and embodiment in the depth of a body? Or more precisely, is it possible to save oneself in the counter-actualization of the event, in the simple and flat performance of an actor or a dancer, only to prevent the actualization that characterizes the victim and suffering? So we see here that it is not that one has to prevent actualization altogether, but one has to execute, to render the repetition of the actualization in another realm in order to counter the regular actuality of things in natural depth. That is, in the empirical reality, we have certain sort of profane, inarticulate actualities of something. This might be uncanny things, sufferings, whereas in the next supreme realm of actualization, these uncanny or messy things can be transformed into mathematical clarity or plastic beauty or strange performative trajectory that counter the mess of the depth. At the same time, this new realm of abstracted articulation, being disjunct, is still conjoined with the previous depthy one, preserving its genesis in it and with it, as I already mentioned. But these new abstracted elements or acts on the surface will not mimic, represent, or imitate the realm of depth, the sufferings that one endured in the regular reality, but they will distill itself as a paradox. And precisely this topology is a Nietzschean topology, a Nietzschean gesture, as what is repeated and what comes as the abstract line onto the surface, as what comes as the cat's smile without the cat, is this paradoxic, humorous ridiculing exceeding the profane actuality. To repeat then, we have to put aside Badiou's interpretation, according to which Deleuze deals only with actuality of teeming particles and quantities. And actuality in this case equals empirical actuality for Badiou, nor will it be, as Hallward asserts, that Deleuze deals mainly with virtuality, which resides somewhere in the realm of abstract lines, and themes, aleatoric surfing signs. Rather, actuality and virtuality are simultaneous. They come together. And I think I need more time to go through virtuality, also the way Deleuze deals with it in his text, One Less Manifesto. But just to repeat at the moment that the virtual and actual go together in pair. And why this dissection happens, that we have two very conspicuous and important thinkers who somehow take up such different and versatile interpretations of Deleuze, is probably that they ignore the dimension of genesis, of how actuality of depth transposes itself into actuality or counter-actuality of supreme being or of the event. Now, again, why this confusion with Deleuze? Is it about empiricism and actuality, or transcendentality and virtuality? So what is Deleuze about? Is he topological or abstract? Is it about semiology or dark matter of physical particles? And by the way, Ray Brassier was reading a lecture where he also was searching for the answer in this direction when he put the question how to coordinate the abstract line and the immanence, the concrete performative practice and the surface eventualities with in case of Deleuze. And I also had been thinking about it a lot, how to resolve this difficulty. And I will try to maybe just present the result of my thoughts. I think the paradox is in the fact that the concreteness, the topology, immanence, all those things that are associated with things perceived empirically, so things with the molecular elemental objectivity, all these materialisms of Deleuze, all these particle-based materialities, while residing in empirical realm, first and foremost, his empiricism does not reside in empirical realm, but in the realm of the transcendental, in the realm of the Aeon, in the pure time of Aeon. So imagine that you have to be empirical within transcendentality. And now I quickly try to explain this through three modes of repetition that Deleuze develops in his difference and repetition. First repetition for him is chronic, and this is pure duration of the present. Second repetition is poetic, and then he talks about À la recherche du temps perdu and Marcel Proust. So this is the novel, this is narration, and the narration hinges on the past, and the tragic repetition, which is dramatic repetition, which is cast into the future. And this is the repetition which happens in the cesura. If you know what, well, I pronounce it in a Russian way, cesura, which takes place in poetry, for instance, when he discusses Hölderlin, cesura, which is the halt of the rhythm. And he says it is precisely in this caesura, when time is out of joint, when we have some kind of empty time in which nothing but this time is happening. This is the time of the evental, as only the event is happening here, which somehow equals this time of the happened. And precisely this third repetition, or the third temporality, is the temporality of the Aeon. Now, in other words, it is in the abstract line which emerged from depth as its genetic effect that we should seek the anthropometric empirical qualities, and not in the depth of teeming empirical actualities. So this condition is absolutely fantastic. So we should seek for anthropometry, not in the depth of empiricism, but in certain realm which is not empirical, in transcendental realm. In other words, all empiricism of Deleuze evolves in the dimension of transcendentality. Hence the confusion. The abstract acquires the anthropometric concreteness and temporal precision, as in this condition, caesura, because caesura shows us the time little by little, step by step. It is when we reach this caesura that quantities, rhythm is actualized. But this seizure, caesura in poetry, is already the arrest, the suspended emptiness, Aeon. This is what we do not see in Hallward's interpretation, as Deleuze remains for him in Bergsonism. So he gets rid of the empirical mess, whereas we need the empirical condition precisely in transcendental dimension. So for Deleuze, it is very important when you're cast into the virtual deuxième étage, in this temporality of Aeon. Precisely there, you launch the new actuality, which then Deleuze calls counter-actuality, or rather, there is the empirical actuality and you react on it by means of pure, added, artistic, or surreal reality, which, like the second étage, grows out of the first, as I said, falls out as butterfly from caterpillar. But it is in this added surreal reality that proper concreteness evolves, when movement becomes totally anthropometric from point A to point B. In such realm, fatality rules, not Boulesian aleatorics, not Guattarian cosmic contingency. Such total actuality is as well virtual because it is not evolving in regular reality. So if in the regular reality one might be dying, in the second realm one might be performing and laughing while dying in the ontic, profane reality. And the metaphor, the proper metaphor for this second realm is the metaphor of the rope walker, which shows us both the genesis, the empirical realm, and the sublime realm of the performance. The rope walker moves further, each step leads to effectuation, but without the abyss, without the depth of the abyss, his walk would not mean anything. We have here two dimensions or two realms. That is the genesis from abyss over which the rope walker is suspended, and the abstract line over the abyss, which becomes absolutely concrete topologically. And we have here the anthropometry of movement. First step, second, third, up to the end, when time becomes, as Deleuze defines in the third type of repetition, ordinal, not cardinal. So in this third tragic repetition, we don't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but ordinally, first, second, third. This implies seizure of the chronologic duration of time, and the Bergsonian temporality is surpassed here too. One is actualized on this rope, but as it is not regular empirical actuality, the walk on the rope could as well be defined as counter-actualization, yet it is rather extreme actualization. So why could we say that body in this case remains to be empirical body, but at the same time it is claimed to be incorporeal? This is because body in this case is as well incorporeal, as it stops to be simply the organism. It plays the ideal. If body behaves as idea, so if body remains empirical body or just nominal body, but it behaves transcendentally, it behaves as the transcendental essence, it is mortifying for the body, right? For the ontic body. It even cancels the body. But meanwhile, while it is mortifying for the body does not stop nominally to be empirical body. And thus teaming of the empirical multiplicities and the nominal empiricism of body is overtaken by supreme being. And of course, this condition is quite pathological as we see it, because eventually it is absolute plenitude, but ontically it is the decrease of life. And the actualization of steps on the rope are plenitude, but each step further is increasing the mortifying danger, and thus ontically it approximates death. It is the supreme effect that is not needed in the ontic dimension, but is indispensable in the evental realm, while it never loses its genesis in the empirical backstage. And now I come to Deleuze's quote from the Logic of Sense about the quasi-cause, which can help us to clarify this typology. So quasi-cause is the cause which is not deep, substantial. It does not evolve in regular causality, but it emerges on the surface and deploys its causality eventually. But to repeat that, this is not this mingled, overturned aleatoric causality that Lyotard and Guattari speak about. The events on the surface of liquid refer on the one hand to intermolecular changes onto which they depend as their real cause, but on the other hand, they refer to the variations of the tensions on the surface on which they depend on as their quasi-cause, the cause which is ideal or fictitious. In other words, the quasi-cause is the incorporeal effect, sense, that emerged on the surface from the depth of sufferings and mixed fusions. So you see here that I'm not inventing anything, but simply following Deleuze's arguments. This is why repetition, or this supreme performance in the realm of event and eventality, should be understood in the vein of the transcendental realm, but it is the physical body that has to perform the transcendental goals. It is the physical body that has to perform the incorporeal goals. And I'm finishing. So this onthical pathology, which is at the same time tragic repetition and which is at the same time ordinal temporality, is the time of fatality, but at the same time is the time of the rhythmical. And in the time of the rhythmical, or the third repetition, there are no reversibilities, as with Boulez, where rhythm is taken over by contingency, by aleatorics, but in it, what evolves is irreversible. This is because rhythm is fate. In this case, we have connection of physics and metaphysics, of the empirical and the transcendental. This pure temporality on the rope, which seems devoid of reality, meanwhile, keeps its umbilical cord with the profane chronicle temporality and messy reality. Body is engaged in such actualization simultaneously as empirical and as transcendental. as the ontic and as metaphysical. Yet it is important to remember that the transcendental and ideal, virtual, acquire three-dimensionality as they are performed. And if we remember Alice in Wonderland and the examples of Alice in Deleuze's logic of sense, we see that she's in virtual wonderland. She's in virtual transcendental realm, but her transformations are absolutely anthropometric and three-dimensional. Thus, irreversibility and fatality is crucial for Deleuze, whereas it is not discerned in Guattari, who is more occupied with re-engineering of systems into asignified agencies, recoding the interfaces of the systems and their capacity to become autopoietic within their immanence. And I would end with the quotation again from Logic of Sense. And I think I'm fitting precisely the 1 hour. In this transformation, there is nothing except from the change of will. Here Deleuze talks about the transformation that the actor's performance is effectuating. That when the actor starts acting ontically, there is no change, but it is like a creole, like jumping or leaping on the same place, which totally transforms how you look at it and generally the status and quality of being. Thus, in this transformation, there is nothing except from the change of will. This is something like a creole, effectuated, performed with the whole body, transforming its organic will onto the spiritual one. The body now desires not so much what is happening, but in what happens, it picks something that could be compatible with it according to the laws of the hidden humorous correspondence, the event. It is in this sense that amor fati accompanies the struggle of a free man. Thank you. I would end here, and I would be glad to hear your comments and questions.
All right, thank you so much for that brilliant talk. We'll now open up the floor to, as you said, questions and comments. So if there's anyone, you can raise your hand through Zoom, or if you'd prefer, you can leave a comment in the chat, or if you're watching us through the YouTube live stream, you can also make a comment there, and I will ask it here. So if there's any questions. Kirill?
Hi, thank you very much for that. Lots of interesting things there. It sounds like I'm probably sympathetic to Guattari from your description, and I'll try to kind of organize my thoughts here. So, I mean, as far as I understand it, in Bergson, there's a fairly mundane way in which the virtual and actual have to be linked. So like if I have a pendulum, then the area under the pendulum is virtual to the extent that it'll take an actual path through that area. So there's that kind of mundane way, but it sounded like you were arguing for a much stronger thesis in what's sometimes called modal realism, that there are actually possible worlds that in some ways Deleuze is suggesting must exist. So I guess that's kind of what I had most trouble with. There's this quote where you said, where Deleuze says that he talks about causes that are ideal and therefore fictitious. Now, you and I, and perhaps some others here, have a slightly different understanding what ideal could mean. So I don't get this kind of possible world, fictitious stuff. Incorporeal, I sort of get, and that's where I thought I understood how meaning worked in Deleuze. So I thought that there isn't a problem of level of semiotics as there is in French structuralist linguistics and the level of bodies, because for him, meaning is like this interaction of forces. So at a wedding, if I say I do, that's an event. It qualitatively changes things, but that I do is in some ways incorporeal, because it's not actually the meaning of those words that's doing anything. There's all of these kind of forces, some of which I can describe as semiotic, some of which I can describe as material. So it's like a placeholder. So I understand incorporeal there, but what could it mean to say that there's a whole like fiction or world of the incorporeal? That to me sounds kind of mystical. So it sounds like I'm more on Team Guattari in terms of seeing this as constructive, and how do you use this to think of systems and critique systems.
Well, thanks, Kirill. Well, I think that fictitious is in, what do you call kavычки? How do you call it in English?
Quote marks.
Quote marks, yeah. So fictitious is not meant as fiction, but fictitious is meant as some sort of excess. So when we say incorporeal, we should not regard it as mysticism, as some kind of digital virtuality or some kind of theology. And I think precisely this is done in certain sense by Hallward, because I think he pays tribute to these accelerationist ideas of radical abstraction, which were so important then around 2008, 7, etc. But I think that incorporeal is rather something that is meant simultaneously as corporeal. So with Deleuze, you have the paradoxes of quantities. When two is not two, when incorporeal is corporeal, when for instance, you cannot be empirical simply as the empiricist or simply as the actor network theorist, which is somehow collecting and computing quantities in continuities. But there are constantly some kind of deviating lapsuses. Therefore, I completely agree with you that virtual is somehow inserted into the actual and vice versa, and they form a pendulum. But I would not say that for that reason and by that token, this realm that I delineated is in some sense different from what Deleuze means in other works. I think that it is in no way a classical metaphysics. Rather, it shows us that, I mean, what is really precious for me is that as a radical critic of metaphysics, Deleuze shows this desperation that metaphysics is irreversible to a certain extent. Because, I mean, as long as we deal with the event, I think metaphysics cannot be surpassed. It cannot be surpassed. It can be surpassed in classical sense, but when we deal with this point de repère, death, event, repetitive zones, and to a certain extent Nietzschean constructs, then we have to keep this rejected zone of rejected metaphysics. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that response and for the question. Are there any more questions, comments, anything of that sort? Katerina?
Hi, thanks, Keti, for the great talk. Just a quick question, maybe it's along similar lines of Kittel's remark. Would you say that, I don't know, your rendition of the notion of temporality, I don't know if this was actually what you meant, Kittel, so maybe I should not build on you, but simply formulate my own question or comment. It's more of a question. I'm sorry, a little puppy is biting me all the time, so it's hard to focus. Max, get away. Sorry. My impression was that this rendition of the understanding of temporality as presented by Deleuze in Différence et Répétition was very much detached from the basis he departs from, which is Bergson, and that is a materialist foundation. Then we have the in the background the epistemic model of Nietzsche, to which he refers directly all the time. The model of the eternal return, ending up with developing a concept of time, which is that of.
Sorry, Katerina, which concept I didn't hear the concept.
Sorry, my mic is really bad. A concept of time, which is that of becoming, and becoming is understood as the eternal return. So whatever becomes actually returns, as per Nietzsche. So this is what I remember from that book, and this is how I took it. I even found a quote here in an article, several passages actually in an article I published in 2004. So yeah, many decades ago, in Slovenia, where I'm quoting precisely these parts where he refers to Nietzsche. So it's without a doubt that he's borrowing that model, but of course develops something quite different with the concept of the eternal return and time as becoming and the return of the past, etc. At the center of that, we've got the cesura, it's not just in Russian, it's simply in Latin, the cesura, the break, fissure, right? At the center of it, as if the origin of time, the origin is of course tragic, and following Nietzsche, following Hölderlin, following even Bergson to a certain degree. So this cesura is between l'avant and l'après. It's a void, it's nowhere. Maybe that's why Badiou recognizes the event there, out of which time stems. So this could be also taken, and I always took it in some sort of a material sense, not as something ideal. So is my understanding similar to yours? Was I misunderstanding where you were going with your point, or I don't know, how would you comment to this
Yes, thank you very much.
perception I have? Yeah.
Yes, thanks a lot. I think, yes, these are precisely those problematic points. I mean, should we remain with Deleuze as Bergsonist solely, or there is something else? Should we remain with this model of eternal return of Nietzsche, or there is some transposition of it? Another thing is that, I mean, when I say ideal, I never impose anything ideal on Deleuze. I only try to be surprised why he refers to these notions like ideal game. Of course, for him, ideal is not classical ideal, Hegelian ideal, but it's rather mathematical ideality, right? So it's more a semiological unit, much more than some sort of metaphysical entity. But nevertheless, I would say that he goes beyond Bergsonist understanding of creativity, simply by the token that he also connects it with the Nietzschean repetition. But at the same time, I think that he, in this notion of Aeon, he provides really the philosophy of death. I think this is, it's not ideal. I think that, and by the way, Rosie Braidotti was talking about this, why this obsession with dying and death makes Deleuze still affirmative when he's constantly, obsessively returning to these conditions. And she was saying, and well, her in her book on Deleuze, Rosie Braidotti comes to the conclusion that dying is clad or disguised as vital procedure, because it is precisely in the conditions of the dying that this performative plenitude should be exerted. And this plenitude is not the regular cyclic condition of the duration, of the durational time, right? It's some sort of crack within the time that he describes. And I think that this obsession, of course, somehow allows to put Deleuze a little bit aside from the common materialisms. You know, we have these common materialisms in radical aesthetics, in contemporary dance, in the post-Guattarian semiology as well, in cybernetic theory, my interpretation is that this precision and the accent and the emphasis on event somehow allows to see this special realm in Deleuzian thought, which would make it impossible to squeeze him in this company together with Donna Haraway, Karen Barad. You know what I mean, you know, this physicalist, the team of the ultimate physicalism. So.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks for that. Are there any more questions or comments?
But there is Dmitry
Kravchenko.
Yeah, sorry, my Zoom was acting up. Okay, go ahead, Dmitry.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for this brilliant lecture. My question is actually also growing from the previous ones, and it's quite short. I formulated it just now. So that is, as I understood from your lecture, an events are fatal. Nonetheless, they are rhythmical or somehow connected, and transferring this to the sphere of performative arts in a concrete way. Whether a performer can repeat not death or time, if we can correlate them here, but something else, and not the opposite of death, which is creation or life, but something like, I don't know, courage or braveness or weirdness, or I mean something else. And I think that this actually the possibility of repeating of something, not life or death, squeezes him with those theorists like Haraway or Barrett. I would like to hear your comments on this. What do you think? What do you think?
Thank you. It's really a good question. Yes, I agree that actually repetition is precisely this condition that it is not imitation, it is not reproduction, it is not circular return of something that already happened, but what Deleuze is saying, that repetition is alone, which means that it is torn. You know, what he shows us that repetition or this precisely third type of repetition, which is an artistic repetition, but this artistic repetition can as well happen in normality of life if you deal with its extreme condition, bringing you to the threshold of life and death, of course. And then I would completely agree that the intensity is precisely about paradoxic preformation of both dying, death, as well as the vitality of life. But the realm of repetition and the realm of performing intensity, which is the evental intensity for Deleuze, of course, will be to a certain extent tied to the life and its empirical condition. Maybe it might be experiencing dying as part of this lifelong time, but at the same time, it might present certain kind of paradoxic response to it. So precisely this paradoxic response. I mean, I think that when we speak about Socrates, for instance, Socrates, his last word is let's sacrifice the rooster to Asclepius. And it's totally absurd phrase, right? It's total absurdity, it's total humor. It has no connection with the whole dramatic ongoings that Plato is describing in Phaedo. Nevertheless, this is how this dialogue ends. And this is precisely the repetition, right? So Socrates is dying, but at the same time, he pronounces this absolutely absurd, humorous sentence, which is neither connected with the whole drama of why this happens, what happens, of how he is in dialogue with his disciples. And it is at the same time insane, but it is not insane in clinical context, but it is somehow supra-sane in performative context. This is how I could answer this. Yes, Kirill's question, yeah, that dancer quote is very suggestive. Seems like it's almost the opposite definition of performance to Austin Butler. Yes, I would agree that it's opposite definition to John Austin and Judith Butler, like it's meant to be a break in performativity. Yes.
All right, thank you so much. Are there any more questions or comments? Okay, we're right at 8 o'clock, which is, well, 8 o'clock European time, which is exactly when we're supposed to finish, so we're very efficient. So if there's no more, we can end it there. So a very, very big thank you to Keti Chukhrov for that brilliant talk, and thanks for the questions and the conversation afterward. Before we go, I just want to say a quick note about the School of Materialist Research itself and these open seminars. We had a seminar planned for tomorrow by Romina Weinberg, but unfortunately, due to some unforeseen circumstances, it will have to be postponed. So if anyone's watching that was also going to attend that, just so you know. So once again, thanks to Keti, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.